This episode of Transmission Interrupted was recorded October 17th, 2025. This is Transmission Interrupted, a podcast series from NETEC, the National Emerging Special Pathogens Training and Education Center. Welcome to Transmission Interrupted from NETEC.
Hello and welcome to Transmission Interrupted. My name is Jill Morgan. I'm a nurse here at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. For those of you not yet familiar with NETEC, our mission is to set the gold standard for special pathogen preparedness and response across health systems in the U.S. with the goals of driving best practices and closing knowledge gaps and developing innovative resources. NETEC works alongside and in cooperation with the CDC and is funded by ASPR, the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response. One of the mini series we've been doing on this podcast is talking to some other people from NETEC in what is their specialized role. And so NETEC, as many of y'all know, have pillars of activities that we do in metrics and consultation and education. And one of those pillars is Special Pathogen Research Network, or SPRN. This series has really let me reconnect with some folks I don't get to see very often and highlight the work of some other people that I get to work with all the time. And so I'm really pleased today to have Abbey Lowe with me from Nebraska. Abbey is part of the SPRN work group. She's the work group 1 lead for NETEC's SPRN. She's also the associate professor in the Department of Health Promotion and a scholar at the Global Center for Health Security there at UNMC in Nebraska. So welcome, Abbey. I'm excited to learn more and talk about SPRN.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks for having me. You're right. Our paths don't cross that much, but it's a pleasure to be here today and to get a chance to chat.
Thanks. So I want to just start out, and I will say that my background as a nurse, I had never worked in clinical research until recently. And even during our Ebola experiences, my experience with research was very, very limited. So there were a lot of phrases that got used that I was not familiar with. And I just want to start with some level setting of some lingo that I know is very native to you, but is a little bit of a mystery to many of the rest of us. So I've mentioned the Special Pathogens Research Network, or SPRN. But one of the other phrases that comes up a lot is the idea of an IRB. And there are probably some other ones that I'm not even aware of that really are key to understanding what goes on in research. So can we start out with just what these things are and where you feel like they fit into sort of the larger idea of preparedness that we know NETEC is about?
Yeah, absolutely. And please, we all get in our little lanes and have our repertoire of acronyms. So please do stop me at any time if I'm using one that's familiar to me and not to you. Yeah, so IRBs are institutional review boards, and they provide ethical oversight to research, to human subjects research, and they're federally regulated. And so a local institution like Emory will have their own IRB that reviews human subjects research and approves it at your site for your researchers to go ahead and do ethical human subjects research at Emory, for instance. And sometimes there's a central IRB or a single IRB that goes ahead and does the oversight for a multi-site study. And so one IRB will review a research protocol, for instance, for NETEC for 13 sites, right? And that requires that each site locally says, yes, this IRB can review the research for us. So it sounds like, so let's do this centrally, we'll make it easier. But there's still a lot of work that happens at each site to make that happen. We all have local policies at our institutions that are really important. And so they need to be checked off on locally at your IRB before a central IRB then can function as the IRB we call IRB of record for local sites. So how this relates to NETEC and why we have a capability like a single IRB for the network and why we maybe do things a little bit differently is we work in the space of outbreaks, right? So IRBs and central IRBs are not necessarily fast processes. why would they be? They're kind of on a rhythm that is with local research and, not to say that they're slow, but there's lots of processes in place and a lot of administrative kind of processes in place that aren't necessarily like built for speed, right? So why that matters for people like us is we don't know when an outbreak will happen. And then you have a window of time that it's really important to be able to review that research protocol, not rush it through, but really be able to review it so that an investigator at a site is able to use it if appropriate for that specific disease and all of that good stuff too. But a lot of times the way the IRBs are set up, you would miss the window for research.
Right.
Because the processes in place are not built for the kind of work that we do at NETEC and at SPRN. So I think importantly, NETEC, the charge was expanded in 2016 out of some of the situation that happened with the Ebola virus disease outbreak. And they recognized we have to have the infrastructure to support clinical research readiness for response. And they understood that there were really important challenges that were operational, both about the research pieces, like a standardized protocol that would guide administration of medical countermeasures. Oftentimes I am dropping a lot of acronyms in here, but MCMs, medical countermeasures, these are essentially therapies that may be used in a public health emergency. They are FDA regulated products, but they're oftentimes unproven interventions. So we don't have the evidence base to say, this is for sure your standard
right
therapy for the disease. But so that makes research really a lot more important too. To be able to study them well means to be able to have all those processes in place that allow for us to study them during an outbreak. And so SPRN then, I think in 2016, that's when SPRN was stood up as part of NETEC, really to kind of put together some of the infrastructure pieces, the operational pieces that would allow for us to conduct research as part of an outbreak. So,
yeah. So it sounds like you're really trying to blend two worlds that maybe have very different speeds. And I'm thinking about the sloth that a cartoon movie put in the place of a DMV worker, so we think about these sort of, in funny ways at least, systems or processes that go really slowly, and people are used to being able to slow walk through those. And people like me who live in a state of impatience, and during an outbreak, we'd be like, wait a minute, I need this immediately. And how you get those two pieces to work together means that you have to plan ahead, that you have to have some parts and infrastructure in place ahead of time so that the super fast need doesn't roll into this maybe more staid tradition of how you go through an IRB and a research protocol and get it all approved. And as you said, without cutting corners, right? How do we do this so that it's all still above board and reasonable, but we want to get therapeutics to people who have a new pathogen, or we want to get a vaccine to people who might be exposed, and we want to do that quickly. And we have a lot of rules we have to obey. So it seems like SPRN is doing some almost magic stirring of these different ingredients to make something that works here.
Yeah, magic stirring. I like that. In some ways, it's a lot of just really unglamorous work of bringing people together and figuring out how do we make this work effectively, where we still review things. Like the review is not different, right? The standard paradigm is still there. This is reviewed like any kind of therapy review would happen in an IRB, but we can't use our same processes necessarily to do it. And so, you think, okay, well, maybe somebody could get it done in an emergency, but we really want to give IRBs the time to kind of figure out, okay, if we're going to do this, how do we do it well? What processes? How do we develop processes that fit this problem set, this challenge set that we have in front of us? And how do we coordinate and communicate and get the kind of information that we need in order to be part of the response?
I wanted to ask you because, again, sort of my background as a nurse was not at academic medical centers until coming to Emory. And so IRB was not a term I had ever heard before. And this whole idea of doing research at the bedside was not something that I was familiar with. So can places that are not academic medical centers, like, do they have to create an IRB? Like if somebody, let's say another facility joined the NETEC network, but they're not an academic medical center, like how does that work? Do ethicists create an IRB or do you join somebody else's? I'm not sure how I understand that, kind of what goes into that.
Yeah, yes, hospitals have IRBs that are academic medical centers. They need a federal-wide assurance. They need to be registered through the appropriate channels to have an IRB. And then, for instance, at Nebraska, we have a rapid response IRB, and it is a fully convened IRB with processes and policies in place to review a protocol within 24 hours. So that is a local capability of the University of Nebraska Medical Center. I think it came into place in 2005. So I don't think that the intention was necessarily for special pathogens, but that has been a key use case for the rapid response IRB at Nebraska. So, then when you think about a single IRB for multi-site research, then you have to think, okay, well, you have processes in place for your local IRB to review. So at Nebraska, we could get the protocol reviewed within 24 hours. But then what if Emory doesn't have any kind of analog processes in place for them to seed review? There's a process called reliance. And so then that's an important part of your ability at Emory to seed review and move with the flow of the rapid response IRB at Nebraska. So it's herding cats. And you have to think about how do you put processes in place, which is why I'm saying, it's not glamorous necessarily, but it is a really important piece of what's the magic stirring is how do you kind of fit all these pieces together so that we're ready for whatever special pathogen and whatever potential therapy protocol we might want to look at for that event. And I think from my perspective, a lot of this has come down to preparedness and taking preparedness exercises to IRBs, which was something we do all the time. But the first time I said something like, well, we should do some exercises to kind of put together policies and procedures and to test things. And they looked at me like, what? This is pre-COVID. So, this was Greek to them. And I said, no, I think that we can develop good processes and good SOPs for this, and we can test them, and we can bring the different sites together, and we can figure out what are the key capabilities we need to do this well, both at the single IRB and then at local institutions as well. So
yeah, because it seems like it would be very important. I mean, hopefully we've developed this RESPECT network, Regional Emerging Special Pathogens Treatment Center network. So now 13 hospitals across the country that I think everybody would expect are going to be able to deliver the highest quality care possible for some new pathogen or some reemerging pathogen. And that might mean giving something that has shown some promise for use in some other study and things like that. And really the ability to roll that out quickly in order to deliver that excellent level of care. And that might be right for the staff, right? It might be that you're delivering something like a vaccine or a prophylaxis to staff, or it could be a treatment modality for the patient. It really has to be sort of baked into preparedness and the whole response network. So that my favorite subject, of course, PPE, it's not just having the other bits in place. It's having this infrastructure there so that when a new medication or a new treatment comes down the pike, it's got a pathway to reach the people who need it the most. So, Abby, thinking about how this is like integrated into the idea of preparedness and sort of, this response network of hospitals, what all makes up research projects and thinking about like pharmacies and labs and nurses? I mean, like what are the component parts that make this work?
Right. Well, and SPRN has 4 work groups. And so we have a work group, an IRB work group that we've been talking about. They have a work group composed of basic kind of scientists that think kind of about the virus and work in labs and that kind of thing. And then they have clinical scientists as another work group that are really thinking about kind of how we move from pathogen to patient in practice. And then we have a work group that's composed of coordinators, research coordinators. And so it's kind of all needed to ensure that we've thought about, okay, are we thinking about the best therapy here? And that might be at the intersection of the basic scientists and then the clinical scientists. And then are we thinking about how to operationalize it well? And that definitely would necessitate the nurse coordinator group. But of course, the ethics and the IRB work group is there too, because it is both the coordinator group and my work group will touch a lot of the pieces that allow for the research to move to approval. So then, to your point, some therapy protocols will need review of something we call pharmacy and therapeutic review. And that happens at the local site at Nebraska, as well as the local site. Oftentimes, they'll have a local committee that they want to review it to ensure that we've done what we need to do at the single IRB and at the local sites. There'll be different review committees to make sure that whatever we are moving forward to research is appropriate. So, and it's gone through all the paces, both the IRB review as well as some of those local reviews. And, the important thing too, from an operations perspective here, like this all is standard practice for any kind of study drug, cancer, or infectious disease. But the trick can be if at Emory, your pharmacy and therapeutic review meets once a month, right? And so then you have an instance where even if the Nebraska Rapid Response IRB gets that protocol approved in 24 hours, and you at Emory get invited to participate, and you have the invitation from the study team at the lead site to participate in this protocol, and then you might turn around and say, oh, okay, well, I have to get this done at my site, and that won't meet until, November 15th or whatever, right? And so then that's kind of the other piece of this too. It's not enough for just the single IRB to be able to do it efficiently and to have the processes in place to make sure that we are doing due diligence and reviewing thoughtfully these protocols. But it also really requires local institutions to have thought about it too. And so Emory, for instance, has all kinds of its own local rapid response policies as well, so that then that integration is more seamless. So,
yeah. And it seems like thinking about this intersection with ethics and pharmacy and things like that when you're talking about consenting people for research in this case, it can, I'm sure, be really intimidating. Like, congratulations, you have Ebola, and we have this one drug. It's like, it would be really difficult to, I think, be completely objective or completely, are people going to refuse the one drug that might have a chance of helping them? I mean, it seems like getting consent, that ethical side of research, could get really sticky in biocontainment.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think there's not only that the patient is really sick and there's no proven therapy. We don't have anything that we know works in certain instances. There's also that, well, my doctor's saying that we should take this, or I think that's what they perceive that's being said, right? I think we call that therapeutic misconception, right? Like that they think that it is treatment when it's not. So the consent, to your point, the consent really needs to be really thoughtfully reviewed. And then the teams that consent also have to have a really good SOP for how they consent that kind of attends to, does this person really understand that this might not make them better at all? And that we really don't know. It is what we have available, but we don't have any guarantees that it will help. And so does the consent reflect that? And have we been really thoughtful about how that consent conversation is going to go? And I think thinking about containment too, Jill, often we think about whether or not people might be under public health orders or, would they even be allowed to leave, even if they wanted to, if they aren't super sick, I guess. So there's also that kind of implication of that there's a public health threat at play too. So we want to be really thoughtful of how we obtain consent, that we're really doing our best to uphold a potential participant's autonomy in that circumstance, and that they're not having any kind of undue influence, whether or not they recognize that, okay, this is just research and I can choose whether or not I want to do it. So,
Yeah.
Great point.
I remember when we had some of our early Ebola patients, and certainly at that time, we did not have any proven therapeutics. There were a few things that have been tested in some animal models, right? And so I think, interestingly, because at that time, back in 2014, 2015, when Ebola was really wreaking havoc and thousands of people were dying, many healthcare workers were dying, it was like, whoa, well, here you are, you can offer something to somebody that you bring back to the United States, but there's nothing to offer to these people. But it wasn't proven, right? And so I think there was no right answer there, because if you said, well, we're going to roll out this research or this new study drug in, Sierra Leone, people would also have been aghast. You can't study people that have no other choice or that maybe don't understand. And so it's really like a precarious situation. I'm grateful that our patients agreed to some of the study medications that we thought we might give them, because we learned some things that might have had some promise and something that didn't seem to have any effect at all. Mm-hmm. And it's a really difficult thing to, as you said, sort of ramp up or to implement in the heat of a moment. And just as difficult on, for instance, the vaccine side, to have things ready to go when an outbreak occurs. And actually, we've been really lucky with this, unlucky, if you can be lucky in an outbreak, that we do have now a vaccine for at least one strain of Ebola that has been able to be rolled out in enough people that we feel pretty confident that it offers good protection. And that might be why we're seeing, for instance, the outbreak that's occurring right now. We're recording this in mid-October of 2025, and there's been an outbreak of Ebola that's been simmering in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but we have now not had any new cases for several weeks. And partly, we hope, that's because folks have been on the ground implementing, exactly as you said, sort of a therapeutic that is now available, but that was really tried in several different study groups across the world in order to get it to this point to be able to roll it out during an actual outbreak. So you have to tolerate the stuff that takes long and slow in order to respond quickly for the things that need really rapid response times. If you had to think about maybe sort of the ultimate goals for you and SPRN in your work group, like what would your magic wand wave and do?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe I'll tie it to some of those things that you were just saying too. I do think what we do in SPRN, I think that there is a really important piece first about identifying the medical countermeasure that we should be using for the special pathogen in place. What is the most appropriate medical countermeasure to be researching and to be preparing to research in these very specialized units, and thinking about societal benefit as we think about the identification of those medical countermeasures is super important. And the other thing that I hadn't mentioned is SPRN works very closely with a lot of the entities that are in outbreak affected countries, and we do our best to ensure that we are prioritizing the medical countermeasures that are being prioritized in outbreak affected countries, and that there's good coordination around both the medical countermeasure as well as kind of the research conduct that's happening, whether it's being offered under expanded access or if it's moving to a randomized controlled trial, that we are also really doing our best to coordinate with the outbreak efforts that are happening in the country there, which obviously I think is super important to what we do in the US. It's hard though. So if I had a magic wand, it's that all those squirrels get on the same page. So I don't know if I'm going to solve that, but I think what we've done here in thinking about bringing IRBs into response efforts, not seeing it as, okay, well, we'll submit a form when we need something from you, but saying like, actually, no, we're going to brief you. And so my work group is the IRB work group within SPRN, and I have representatives from all the regional treatment centers, and we meet quarterly to verify point of contact is correct. We work on education efforts for the regional treatment centers, and we ensure that we have kind of the right resources at the centers too. But that work group also is part of then what happens during response in NETEC and SPRN. They get convened, they get updated so that we can say, okay, here's the therapy protocol we're moving forward with. Here's the trajectory. Here's when the single IRB is reviewing. And here's how that looks across the network. Our director, Lauren Sauer, meets with that group too to brief them on outbreak. But again, it's not that they need a daily, but that there are these really important, first to build rapport and points of contact, but then also to see them as part of a good response. Because again, we talked about some of the ethical issues that are involved and the things that they're looking at both in the IRB review, but as well in their local reviews, and wanting to make sure they have the opportunity to do it really thoughtfully in order that research attends to the participants that we recruit and move forward in that research. So magic wand, maybe that was just easy and you could just write a checklist and it would have happened. But you know how this works. It's definitely a lot of, I remember when I first started doing some of this, I saw online, there's after the 2014, 2016 EVD outbreak, there was stood up a public health emergency research review board. And I think it was somewhere on the federal website under NIH maybe. And I thought, perfect. It's done. They figured it out.
Done. Poof.
I don't need to do it, right? I don't need to worry about it. But I think that the concept was so good and so right. Like we need a review board that understands the needs of high consequence infectious disease research. We need that, right? And we needed them to know that like both the subject matter expertise, like all the ins and outs of public health and infectious disease and all the ways that is important. We needed that subject matter expertise, which the Public Health Emergency Research Review Board, or the FERB, did. They had all those kind of review parts. But I think what also is super critical is that it attends to how IRBs are situated operationally within hospitals, academic medical centers, and how they function and work logistically. And so long story short, my magic wand would be that it could be solved with a checklist. But in real life, it's solved in the same way a lot of things are solved with preparedness and response, by making sure you have the right people around the table, by developing things that work for all the stakeholders that have a part to play, and then a lot of exercises and drills to make sure it works the way we want it to, and that we can figure out what we need to do differently before we ever need to respond. So,
yeah, I think it's so important for people to understand that one of the reasons that this kind of research is so important in our field, in this field of special pathogens, is that for the most part, what we can offer patients clinically right now is simply called supportive care. In other words, If you come in tomorrow with Ebola or Marburg or Lassa fever or Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, I don't have an antidote. I don't have an antibiotic or an antiviral or anything that's necessarily been proven to cure you. What I have is the ability, under very controlled circumstances, to deliver the best quality care we can to you, supporting your vital functions, supporting you hemodynamically. So making sure that you have adequate blood pressure and enough fluid circulating and nutrition, and that you're still breathing okay, and all those other parts of you, your kidneys work. I'm supporting those things while your body heals itself. So pretty much from there, anything that we can add that is going to shorten the course or lighten the load or decrease the time it takes for you to get better, those are all positives. And so it's so important for people to realize, and I think you used the phrase, Abby, when we were just sort of introducing this idea to each other about having this podcast, that you really want to aim for something better than the standard of care we have right now. And I think that's just so important for people to get, that all of this work you're talking about, all of the painstaking details of making sure these pieces are in place and that research and IRBs and good ethical practices are integrated into a response network, is so that we can do exactly that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Because there's a real need to figure out what works for patients that have these kinds of diseases. And we just have this window of time usually, and we don't know when it's going to happen, and we have to be ready, right? So that creates a lot of urgency to do it. And obviously it's a very compelling rationale, like to do better than the standard of care, to find things that help treat people. But I think with that comes also a real responsibility to get it right, to get review right in those cases. So you can't use the urgency of the moment to say, well, okay, we're just going to rubber stamp it and move it through. No, we actually should be doing it more carefully. We should be making sure that our exercises hit really key components to make sure that it is thorough and substantive, and that the people charged with independent review, our IRBs, have what they need to do an independent review, that it's not pressured or anything like that for them. And there's always the pressure of the environment and the timing. We can't get away from that. But how do we put processes in place that protect that safeguard and that oversight so that our patients really are afforded really good consents, good protocols, good processes in place, that our teams understand how to operationalize things in an already really challenging environment where there are risks to them too. So I think, yes, you're right, but it's a complex thing. And at the end of the day, a lot of why all the herding cats and figuring out how to do this effectively is so important. Because if we don't get that right, then all these sticky wicket ethical issues, it jeopardizes whether or not we get those right too. So
yeah, absolutely. It sounds like to me, you would like to see a research component integrated into whatever we do, like an exercise or a drill, when we're talking about special pathogens. Like, okay, if this happened today, and maybe we're just doing a drill about bringing in a patient from EMS, but okay, what would we be able to offer our partners? What can we offer this patient? How fast would it be able for us to implement some new protocol, so that we're not just thinking, do I have the PPE, and does somebody have their donning and doffing protocols, and do I know where EMS is going to hand this patient off? But also sort of the back end part of making sure that we have those pieces in place so that we could just drive this towards better practice.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I think we've done a couple exercises now that include IRBs across the network. So I think my continued push is that you at Emory think of your IRB representatives and think about how you might integrate them into exercise planning, because I think that coordination is super important. in how we continue to kind of push on this and how we continue to do this better and better. And I think, it's interesting because across the sites, it's a funny idea, I think, sometimes to both parties. But I think it doesn't mean that they have to be on the unit at all. It's like, do you call the IRB because there's this therapy protocol that you are going to use and you need to kind of figure out how to make it work? It can be small injects that happen. And for IRBs, I think we've done a lot of work with IRB relevant exercises in SPRN that does really convene the IRBs across the network. So again, thinking about how we integrate research into preparedness exercises and what that looks like at the different sites is maybe pieces about, okay, we're going to put this observational protocol together and we're going to practice it. Or it might be like, we're going to ensure that this drill hits our IDS pharmacy and our IRB, and, they're going to get phone calls from us so that we continue to push on how do we ensure that we are preparing for safe patient care and integration of research into the response. Because I do think that there are important questions that are part of that too when we do it in preparedness. Like, okay, should we have done that way? Should we have offered that as part of what we were thinking about with research? Should we have offered that NCM in that case? So I think that there's also great lessons that we can learn through preparedness exercises that do that integrate both.
So I do want to offer a curveball. I did not prepare you for this question, but I'm going to take advantage of the fact that recently NETEC and SPS, this National Special Pathogen System of Care, have talked about this idea of funding 75 new level 2 facilities. So those are facilities that could take care of special pathogens patients for the duration of their care, as long as they don't need any higher level of care that perhaps that facility can't offer. And that might be something like ECMO or something like that. Do you see being able to offer this sort of therapeutic, whether it's an investigational drug or whether it's some other vaccine or something else, do you see integrating level 2 facilities into that ability, into the ability to participate in that way?
That is a great question. And I think the honest answer is it's going to take some listening to those level 2s to see what they feel they would like to do. I think, the challenge is just the amount of work it takes to do the integration. It takes a lot of additional effort from the institution, right? Thinking about each institution, not every institution, but a lot of institutions have a human research protection program. And so there is a lot that has to happen with the human research protection program if you're thinking about including it into a multi-site kind of strategy, a study strategy. If it's doing compassionate use or something like that, then that's a different story. But I think in terms of SPRN, there's kind of a strategy that we move forward with medical countermeasures. Here's the identified MCM for a certain disease, and it's not set in stone, but we have kind of an idea and a strategy of what research might look like. And so thinking about bringing the level 2s into there, I think it's a really great opportunity, but I think it'll take a little bit of listening to them to understand how they feel about taking on something like that, as they're also taking on so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be overwhelming, I think, the first time a level 2 holds on to a patient. And I think that they can hold on to the patient because they want to, because they think they can handle it. And we would want them. I think everybody would want them to be successful, right? Whatever support they would need, we would give them because we do want this model to work. There are plenty of places that do trauma that may not do advanced neurosurge, but they do a great job with other kinds of trauma. And I think that could be a model for obviously the NSPS and things like this. But you're right, you're adding to a hospital that might already be like maxed out in what they can handle and saying, here, could you also do this? But again, it sort of goes back to the foundation of what you're talking about is the importance of thinking about these things ahead of time and putting the pieces in place so that it isn't just a random puzzle at the end. It's like, oh, I take this step and then this step and then this step, and I create this path that lets us do this. So I think it would be exciting. I think that it will be very interesting when it finally happens. But yeah, I can absolutely see that it would be both an opportunity and quite a taxing burden if we don't do it right.
Yeah. And one of the things I'll share too is something that we've done over the last couple of years that I think has been really successful is pre-identifying medical countermeasures and moving them through single IRB review and IRB review in advance so that sites have essentially kind of a protocol at the ready for use, which we have the rapid response capacity where the single IRB can rapidly review a study. And then we have great processes across the network for local sites to also that have local capacity to rapidly move local review through. But then something that we have moved to, and it's been based on the researchers at the sites, is saying, it would be ideal if we could have some of the things that we know would be investigational products that we know we would use in a case reviewed and approved kind of at the ready for us. Because the rapid process is something we have in place, but think about our research teams and our clinical teams who are, if they are getting ready to receive a patient, the last thing I would want for them is to be also having to get a protocol through review, even if it's going through quickly. Like that's additional workload on those teams that are already taxed with really important safety work for their colleagues and for a patient. And you want them to be able to focus on that. So the same is true in how we think about the level twos is how should activities be prioritized for them? And what do they want to do and feel is an appropriate piece of development for their integration into the network? So I don't think that was a simple answer, but hopefully it gets at the question. So
yeah, no, I think it's so fitting because you say it's not a simple answer, but pretty much nothing in your world of SPRN and ethics is a simple answer, right? I mean, there's nuance to all these things. That is both the good and the bad of research is that, some exciting things can come out of it, but exciting things come out of some really detailed, perhaps drudgery kind of work in order to lay a safe foundation.
Yeah. Unglamorous, but it is, it's kind of the safeguard for the whole thing. And the devil is in the details and in the ability to make sure that everyone has what they need to do it effectively.
Well, excellent. I'll tell you, I think that you are, to me, one of the people who helps keep the devil out of the details so that the details are all good. So I am thrilled that I could spend some time talking with you today, Abby. It's so nice to dive into a side of healthcare that I don't spend a lot of time in, that I really am fascinated with, and that I know, having received an Ebola vaccine and given some investigational drugs when we had our Ebola patients, and certainly, as many healthcare workers did, participated in the research aspects of, for instance, the COVID therapeutics. And those have made a big difference. And I'm grateful that people like you are out there making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed and that people are being treated fairly and justly, and that we're taking those small details and making sure that we're getting everything right. So I greatly appreciate the work of SPRN and you, Abbey Lowe. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Jill. And back at you, I definitely think we'd have lots of problems if our PPE wasn't right in these environments. So maybe that's the first detail of all of this anyway. So I definitely have appreciated your work from afar and everything you do around PPE and safety and planning and education with it. So
thanks. Yes, it is near and dear to my heart. All right. Well, for those of you listening at home, thank you for tuning in to this episode on Special Pathogens Research. We hope that you'll join us for future episodes on a wide range of topics, from healthcare worker safety to personal protective equipment, of course, and more about infectious diseases and their prevention and treatment and containment in many, many ways. So if you have any questions for NETEC or ideas for future shows, please feel free to reach out to us at info@netec.org. That's info@netec.org. Or you can find us on the web at netec.org/podcast. And of course, that's where you can also subscribe to future episodes and find out more about today's topic. So thank you for joining me. Thank you, Abbey Lowe from Nebraska. And we'll see you next time on Transmission Interrupted.
You've been listening to Transmission Interrupted, a NETEC podcast, produced and edited by Benjamin Madsen, with additional support provided by Britton Clark, Veronica Lavaro, Jason Noble, and Lisa Stone. Special thanks to our guests and the subject matter experts at NETEC for their insight and guidance. This podcast is supported by the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response. For more information, tools, and training on special pathogen preparedness, visit netec.org. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for tuning in to Transmission Interrupted.